I'm Trent. Great to meet you, and great to be here to share some thoughts for Zu-grama. Let's get started. So my talk today is BCI AC, Human Superintelligence by Accelerating Brain Interfaces. And I'll have space for questions at the end, of course, too. Let's jump in. So we all know that artificial superintelligence is coming. You know, right now we have AIs that are getting smarter, getting towards AGIs, eventually ASIs. And it's much sooner than any of us realize. So we know it's coming. How do we react? And I think it's actually, we can do knee-jerk reactions and temporary things to try to slow it down or whatever, but I think it's healthier to start by asking, instead of how do we react, we should say, what do we want ultimately? What do we want as humans and humanity? And maybe as a starting point, it's, don't die, right? Just like, we don't want to die if an asteroid strikes, and we don't want to die from nuclear holocaust. Generally, we probably don't want to die from AI superintelligence coming. Okay, but can we do better than that? Well, for starters, exploring the cosmos would be pretty cool, right? From, the inspiration of countless science fiction authors. And we can even do better than that, right? What if we could not only explore the cosmos, but reshape it, build Dyson spheres to harvest energy around stars, and so on and so forth. So this is, to me, at least, a really great, like, super high level goal for humanity. And as I will be talking about, humanity unbound by our biological origins. And of course, it's to each his own, right? It doesn't have to be where every one of you wants to explore the cosmos or reshape it or whatever, but to me, this would be a fun adventure, and it's really to each his own what they want. Okay, so towards reshaping the cosmos, I'm going to talk about two overall components of this, or two pieces. First of all, I'm going to talk about AI and how it's evolving into AI superintelligence. And a risk along the way. I'm going to do a sub dive into the AI risk. And then I'm going to talk about humans evolving into human superintelligence as basically a way to be competitive with AI superintelligences, such that we can join in the fun, if you will. So let's get started. Let's zoom in on the thread one, AI to AI superintelligence. So if we talk about definitions of AI, what are some reasonable definitions? And one definition going back, at least 25, 30 years is, could AI do a task that only a human could previously do, right? And this is, AI in the narrow AI sense. What you have here as an example is an antenna is on the right, and it looks like a bunch of bent paper clips. And for decades, ever since, RF and analog circuits were invented and really ran with, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, it's been human designers designing these RF antennas. And along came a research group out of NASA in the late 90s, early 2000s that said, well, what if we just tried evolving these antennas? And, basically with this idea of bent paper clips. And if the bent paper clips could have just the right shape, they could do better than humans. What if that's possible? And so they did, and then they did, right? It worked. It actually worked remarkably well. And I know these research as well. One of them actually was so happy with the results. And by the way, like when I say it worked well, is it does it pick up the signal as well as a human design antenna? Is it low power? Is it linear, basically very little distortion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So across the board, all the specs, the AI design was actually better than the human design. And there's a wide variety of different, goals you might have when you're designing RF, but they actually found that they could tune their AI, like get the AI to point at different problems and do well on all of them, to the point where one of them spun out of NASA and created a company called X5 Systems. And that company's been going now for more than 20 years, quite successfully. And these antennas, interestingly, go up on rockets all the time, basically for the rockets to communicate back and forth with Earth and other rockets. So this is an example of narrow AI, doing one task really, really, really well, right? With like super cool AI, of course, and being creative as well. Humans do not have a lock on creativity, and my own PhD was on creative AI, 20 years ago now. Then, what about an AI doing not just roughly par with a human on a narrow task, but doing at a level far exceeding a human? What I have here is a screenshot of an SoC, system on a chip, basically a big chip with a whole bunch of sub pieces of IP in there with analog parts and RF parts and memory and microprocessors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these days, a full SoC can be 100 billion neurons or more. The new NVIDIA GPUs are about 100 billion neurons. There's some other crazy large-scale AI chips that are even 1 trillion neurons. And a standard fare AI, a standard fare chip these days is 5 billion, 10 billion, 20 billion transistors. But if I said neurons, I meant to say transistors. So you've basically got these chips that have 20 billion, 100 billion transistors. And at the same time, they're designed in a matter of 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months, and maybe a core team of maybe 10 engineers, maybe 20, right? So you've got 20 people designing 20 billion parts and doing it in a span of, say, 3 months, 6 months. How is this possible? And the only way that this is feasible at all is these designers are not doing it all by hand. Imagine trying to, get 20 billion parts connected together by hand, even with the help of a computer, just to move the schematic around. Well, it's not possible. But AI is what connects the dots here. So under the hood, people specify what they want, and then there's a whole host of different tools out there, and a whole industry for this called the electronic design automation industry, EDA, the industry that I come from, for people doing this. So they take people writing code that looks a lot like C, and it compiles into gates. It's basically digital gates that then it's sort of one level above transistors. And then those gates get compiled into placement and routing. So instructions for manufacturing, the digital side. And in the analog side, it's almost as automated too. And then this all gets put together. So this is something that's been around for quite a while. In fact, the EDA industry, this electronic design automation industry, has been using AI in different shapes and forms since the 1980s. Simulated annealing, for example, was invented in that industry in 1984. And even the modern algorithms, such as Atom, for optimizing neural networks are actually derivatives of simulated annealing in many ways, which is kind of neat to see. And myself, my first 2 startups and my PhD were all in the space focusing on analog RF memory chips, design and verification. So these AIs can do tasks far exceeding what a human can do, and it pays off to us every single day for design of the chips themselves, and actually design of the silicon itself too at the semiconductor transistor level. I helped work with TSMC. I helped them design the next generation of Moore's Law, thanks to the software we were building. And we did this again and again. TSMC has used this sort of software for 15 years now. Okay, so we're seeing, 2 definitions of AI. Can do a task that only a human could previously do, so something narrow, par with a human in one task, and then superhuman intelligence on a narrow task. But where are we heading with this, right? So basically, compute is going up higher and higher and higher, especially for AI. So this graph, the x-axis is time, going back the last 70 years from 1952, and the y-axis is the amount of training compute in terms of flops going into training an AI model, right? And the AI models of the early 50s were pretty crappy, right? They were, they were called perceptrons, and they were basically a linear model. But then nonlinear perceptrons came along by the late 50s, early 60s, and people, figured out algorithms to tune these, train these, get better, better, better. And throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, this stuff got refined. 1989 was a landmark year because it was the first time people had neural networks that could get trained pretty well using this idea of backpropagation. And that idea carries through to this day in even all the modern neural networks. And so the y-axis, if you note, is logarithmic, right? So you see that it starts at 1e to the 2, and at the very top, it's 1e to the 24, so it's 22 orders of magnitude increase. So even though it's a linear straight line going along there, because the y-axis is exponential, this is actually an exponential. And that exponential was going pretty fast. It was a pretty steep exponential from 1952 to 2010 or so. But then it got a lot sharper, more than twice as sharp, right? What happened? Well, basically, people figured out that in order the unreasonable effectiveness of data, where if you started throwing just more and more and more data at your neural network, and if you made it big enough to be able to handle it, then you could train much larger, more powerful models. And so this was called the deep learning era, right? I actually saw an original paper from this from Hinton and his team at NeurIPS in Vancouver in 2009, maybe 2010, somewhere in there. And they're off to the races. So Hinton was one of the original people who wrote the backpropagation paper in 1989. And he and his students kept believing in backpropagation and so on. And actually, to his great credit, the Nobel Committee recognized this and gave him a Nobel Prize for it a couple months ago. So we went to the deep learning era, circa 2010, 2012, and then the large scale, LLM. Well, the L is large for large language model. In circuit land, by the way, we had LSI, large scale integration, and then we got to VLSI, very large scale integration. So although we haven't seen that happen yet, and with LLMs, we don't have VLMs yet. But and after that, people were talking about extra large and extra very large, all that. It starts getting crazy. So we just stuck with VLSI. So anyway, we're definitely in the era of super large models these days. And now and then, we get big efficiency gains, 10x or more, like we've seen recently with DeepSeek. But a lot of AI all the time has been about how do you get the next 2x efficiency? How do you get the next 10x efficiency in terms of 10x less compute to get the same results, or with the same amount of compute get 20% less error or 2x less error, et cetera. So this, and the thing is, why is this happening? Money. At the very heart of it, it's money, right? It's, if you get more and more powerful silicon, then you can have more and more powerful chips. Then you can have, real-time video games. You can have planes that are safer, as long as you have, proper hiring practices in the FAA, et cetera. So overall, we get all these benefits to society, and we've been seeing that as the years go on, as well as from an AI perspective, the AIs keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter, right? And there's actually a famous paper called The Bitter Lesson, published, I think, about 6-7 years ago by Rich Sutton, a famous AI researcher. And in it, basically, the bitter lesson is that instead of needing, 3 or 10 or an army of PhDs in order to make your AI smarter, 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 all you need is more Moore's law, right? More compute, more data, more training. And this is exactly what's happened, right, for a long, long time now. So, of course, algorithms can help. And that's still, these days, in terms of how much algorithms are improving, they probably contribute about a third, right? About a third from algorithms, about a third from data, about a third from just more compute and Moore's law and stuff. And we're getting about 10x a year these days because there's more money than ever. Okay, so back to the definitions. I talked about narrow AI, that's par with humans. I talked about narrow AI, that's superhuman. What about general AI, that's par with humans? This is, AGI, can do all tasks that previously only a human could do, right? And this is what we're getting really close to, arguably there, right? But not quite there because the AIs aren't really fully autonomous the way that humans are, et cetera, right? But we're getting there. We are unhobbling them too on that. There's now a recent agents craze, and to me, the fact that, agents and blockchain are a match made in heaven, right? Because you can only really truly be sovereign as an AI if you're on chain where people can't turn you off, right? Ethereum, a lot of its marketing in 2015, 2016 in its early days was unstoppable, right? Unstoppable DEXs, unstoppable DAOs, all that. So that technology never went away. It got mature, right? Now there's not just Ethereum, but a lot of smart contracts platforms. So we can actually have, and we do have, unstoppable AIs now out there. And when they get to the level of AGI, they will be essentially sovereign, right? Which to me is pretty cool. And they're sovereign before, they're just not sort of quite smart enough to realize it, right? Another good way to think about this is, it's the Paul Graham smart versus wise idea. And Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, wrote a lot of awesome essays about entrepreneurship. So a smart person is someone who's really, good at thinking on, 1, 2, 3 subjects, right? Really, really good, and can make a lot of money on that if it's like software or something, right? Someone who's wise is minimally competent across everything, right? Maybe there's 100 or 200 things that you could be minimally competent at if you group it that way. Whereas if you're really smart, you might be, really, really good at 1 or 2 of those 3 things. You're smart there, but maybe you're a bumbling idiot on the rest, right? So, AGIs, so far they've been bumbling idiots. They've been really, really smart at 1 or 2 things. They've been smart in the Paul Graham sense, but they haven't been wise. But they're getting better and better. They're edging, closer and closer to truly wise because they can, they're less bumbling idiots and fewer things, right? Okay, so that's what AGI is about. Narrow AI is smart. AGI is wise. And once we hit AGI, then it's going to keep going. It's going to just blow past those gates, and keep going with AI compute, getting AI power, if you will, AI intelligence, growing at about 10x a year, then, you know, even after 1 year of hitting AGI, we'll have something that was power of the human, but now 10x the human in a lot of domains, right? Maybe all of them. And then a year later, 100x, a year later, 1000x, right? So for sure, you know, at the rate we're going, something that's 1000x compared to AGI would definitely be ASI, but even 10x, right? So it could be 1 year after. And so it could happen very, very soon. And the time frame for AGIs, by the way, I'm sure many of you are following this sort of stuff. It could be as soon as you know, 6 months from now to 3 years from now, right? More people are arguing about the latest model from OpenAI, R3 Mini, that maybe it's AGI, right? But we'll see, right? It's not unhobbled yet, though, right? It's not sovereign. Okay, so when you think about AI, AGI, and ASI, and especially ASI, this is sort of how your brain sort of thinks about it. You know, there's humans that are pretty smart, and then, you know, an ape is like a super dumb human, and then a super intelligence is like an Einstein, a super, you know, super Einstein, if you will, right? But that's not really the right way to think about it, right? Because Einstein, you know, he's maybe, you know, 20%, 30% smarter than most humans, whatever, right? And not across the board either. He's just smart. He's not wise across everything. Okay, this is actually what superintelligence is. We have to stretch the x-axis a lot, right? And this is a tough pill to swallow because our linear brains have a really, really tough time capturing this. We've got cognitive dissonance going on, right? And, you know, I like to live in the future. I like to think about the future and so on. But I try to, you know, I very often try to teach my brain, hey, Trent, you know, this is going to happen. This is going to happen very soon, very soon, very soon. And I try to take action for it, but my brain still hasn't fully digested it, right? So I have to, you know, override it with my logic, right? So my type 1 thinking still doesn't believe in superintelligence, but my type 2 thinking, slow thinking does. So thank goodness, because it's happening and we have to get over that cognitive dissonance, all of it. We have to just assume that AGI and ASI will happen. Now, what are we going to do about it, and what do we want? And of course, there's a risk thing here too. If this thing is 10x, 100x, 1,000 times smarter than us, what if it doesn't like us, right? We can hope and we can really try to make it benevolent. And, you know, my good friend and colleague, Ben Goertzel, works on that a lot, right? Going for benevolent AI, and I fully support that goal. But, you know, what if we aren't able to pull that off, right? Or what if we do have some benevolent AIs, AGIs, ASIs, but there's a whole bunch that aren't, and we as humans get run over. So what, you know, and this is the idea of AI risk. So let's talk about how to deal with AI risk. One is let go. This is evolution. This is what people like Larry Page talk about, founder of Google. Okay, I get it. But to me, at least I want a role in the future, and I like to think that humanity does too, right? And, you know, people, a lot more and more people have realized this risk and are raising the flag. And so, of course, you know, just overall as a model, we can say humanity wants a role in the future. Okay. So one idea about, you know, this is, hey, well, let's just put it in a cage and unplug it if there's problems, right? Is that going to work? Well, if it's smart, you know, an AGI or ASI, it's going to be decentralized, right? It's going to be sovereign, so you can't unplug it. So this idea is moot. Well, let's put it in a fancier cage, right? And this is a picture from Avengers 1, where Thor, his brother, and others put Loki in this cage, a super fancy cage. And what happened? Well, Loki tricked Thor, and he just walked on out, right? And he told Thor, are you ever not going to fall for that? So here's the thing, you know, Thor got hacked from a social engineering perspective. And we as humans are gullible, right? Think about all the exploits that happen all the time. Hackers are, and the easiest way for hackers to break into systems typically is with social engineering, right? So, you know, they call up various folks and say, hey, you know, I'm trying to get to the hospital. My wife is pregnant, but we gotta go, but we were just in a car accident. Can you please help me? I need this password here, blah, blah, blah. And they get in, right? And once they're into the one place, then they can own existing systems, et cetera, et cetera. And it happens a lot, right? So, so the biggest, weakest link in humans and the cages for ASIs is humans themselves, right? So we can assume that we are Swiss cheese, especially when up against an intelligence that is 100x, 1000x smarter than us. Okay, what about slowing it down, right? And the problem is there's no actual brakes to slowing it down, right? It's like nuclear proliferation. It's really a game theoretic thing here. if you already have nuclear power, or if you're on the race to nuclear power, like nuclear weapons and stuff, if one nation has it, and others are going to race to have it too, and it's really not feasible to try to convince the nations of the world to completely get rid of all the weapons, right? Because one will realize, hey, if I hold out, then I'll be, way stronger than the rest. So it's just not going to happen, right? So slowing it down is really not possible. And there's these different, people signing this and that declaration, let's slow it down, but it's really doesn't make sense from a game theory perspective, right? What opposite? Let everyone have it, speed it up, right? And this is the EAC idea. And I actually really like EAC in general, the idea of sort of almost gonzo acceleration, right? It's very much in line with capitalism, understanding that market forces are simply, a form of evolution, and speed it up. And by the way, this is actually safer than trying to do this. If you try to do this, what would happen? Maybe at best, you get locked into the hands of, an American government lab and a Chinese government lab. And that's probably much, much more unsafe than here, where you have 10, 100, 1,000 different labs who each have their own AGIs, and then it's multipolar, right? So the different powers balance each other much, much better, right? So this is ironically much safer than the slow it down approach. But it doesn't mitigate AI overtaking, right? So maybe the AIs are balancing the AIs, but humans would still get left in the dust. There's this idea, align the AI with a post-hoc wrapper, right? RLHF and so on. This is what OpenAI did with GPT4. It works okay, but it's in many ways it's pretty woke. But beyond that too, it's clear that it can get jailbreak, right? Again and again and again, right? And every time there's a jailbreak, they try to fix it with some tuning, new system prompts, etc. And then something else pops up, right? So there's endless jailbreaks. So trying to fix this is like whack-a-mole. And I have my own experience with this, with trying to optimize AIs to creatively design analog circuits. You come up with a set of objectives and constraints. You run the synthesis run, the AI run, come back half a day later, and it's cheated. It's found some way to basically route around everything you've given it, trick the simulator or whatever else, and found a way. And then you add another constraint, come back half a day later, it tricked it again, right? And I did this actually for months on end, and I realized I needed to rethink how I was doing my work on AI for creative analog design. In the end, I came up with a different approach to correct by construction, where it was constrained from that very design space towards things that were, tricked by construction. This worked for analog circuits, and it actually can work for a lot of other engineering domains. Part of it might map to here too, but it's not really a way. But something like this, what if you align the AI while growing it, right? So it's basically tuned all the time implicitly, right? That's pretty cool. And people are talking about this a bit. We haven't seen a lot of this. You could argue that some of the reinforcement learning systems now are doing it implicitly because they need to in order to solve certain math problems and coding problems and so on. But maybe not really either. So we'll see. But this has maybe got some promise. So maybe. But big challenge is, can we actually align something 1,000x smarter than us? One answer is start with 1x and then grow it from 1x to 2x and so on. But then you're over leveraged 1,000x. And if you think about in the financial system, if something's leveraged by 20x, that's dangerous. But 1,000x is unheard of danger, right? So the final idea is we need a competitive substrate, right? So we have our meat bag brains right now trying to compete with silicon brains that can keep growing and going and going and going. So what if we, get ourselves a competitive substrate as humans? And I believe this has a lot of promise, but you have to be pragmatic about it. How can we actually get there in a time frame that is, fast enough? And that's what actually a lot of this talk is about. How do we get a competitive substrate fast enough? So let's get there. So I'm going to talk about how humans can get to human superintelligence. And I'm going to focus on brain imaging techniques and brain-computer interfaces. There's really two ways. There's uploads, and then there's brain-computer interfaces as a bridge where you just keep expanding the power of that. Uploads are cool, but actually we're nowhere near the scanning resolution that we need in order to do that in a time frame of the next 10 years. There might be some breakthroughs here and there that might take us there, which I'm excited about. Optogenetics, for example, taken to the nth degree, and a few other things. But we'll see, right? Whereas if we go with brain-computer interfaces directly, then we might be able to do this fast enough. So I'm going to zoom in on that and focus on that. In order to teach you about that, I first need to give you a bit of a backgrounder on some brain imaging techniques. Let's get started. So overall, you can slice and dice brain imaging in a few different ways. One of the most common is there's structural and functional. Structural means it's just a static measure, right? It's a snapshot, it's a photograph. And functional is you're tracking dynamics in real time. You're looking at a video that doesn't stop. And so if we want to do brain imaging that is feasible to be for us as humans to be competitive, then we're going to need to do functional, right? Because we have to be thinking in real time and iterating in real time from our brain to silicon and how we talk back and forth. So let's focus on the functional. And then once again, you might ask, okay, what sort of brain imaging techniques? Another way to slice and dice is degree of invasiveness. So there's fully invasive, such as chip implants, like Neuralink or BlackRock Neurotech. There's completely non-invasive, things like EEG. So this is basically measuring the electrical signals on the surface of your scalp. FMRI is another one, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And there's stuff in between, like optogenetics. I'll get into that in a bit. So invasive, there's chips. What does it look like? Well, you have to crack open the skull, insert the chip, and then the chip itself has electrodes that are maybe passively sitting there that somehow the brain grows its neurons to, or like Neuralink is doing, and almost surely others, the electrodes themselves mechanically move out away from the chip towards brain tissue and neurons, and it makes it that much easier for the neurons to go through. So they might even go, not just a few millimeters, but maybe, even 5 millimeters, 10, maybe more, right? There's some cool videos from Neuralink showing this. So that's something, but of course that's invasive, and a big challenge with this right now, beyond the fact that it's invasive, and people might not like their skull getting cracked open, is that there seems to be a challenge where it gets rejected after 6 months. So these patients, they might have to get a new chip put in every 6 months, and maybe over time it gets rejected fully, right? So this is something that Neuralink is battling with. It's sort of less public, but you can read between the lines. Yeah, so this is a challenge. The next I'll talk about is semi-invasive, which is optogenetics. This is pretty cool. So you get an injection, and in it, it's basically got some synthetic biology work that leads to some of your brain cells, where instead of just firing neurons, instead of the neurons just firing, whenever the neuron fires, instead of just this chemical / electrical fire, they also fire photons, right? And those photons can then get picked up by infrared detectors or other colors. And that is how it works, right? But what this means then is you can be detecting activity at a neuron by neuron level, right? And you can do this with, you can introduce this into different types of brain cells. And yeah, you track via the light signals that come out of this. So this is pretty neat because it's not nearly as invasive. You don't need to crack the skull, you just need a needle. And if you don't like it, or if it looks like it's going to be dangerous, you can actually get another needle and to turn it all off, right? So that's actually where this is at. It's lesser known. It was actually invented about 20 years ago, and now it's under intense research across more than 100 labs throughout the world. Optogenetics. Finally, for fully non-invasive stuff, we've got things like FMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. So here, you basically go into this magnetic field, like we see on the left. It's this giant room-sized magnet to create this field. And then once you're inside that, it applies this radio frequency pulse. And then it basically sees the echo coming back from that, right? Like bats and echoes or sonar or whatever. And from that, it sees changes in blood flow. So it's actually not measuring the electron firing directly. It's measuring changes in blood flow. So it's got lower latency, right? It's not as good throughput, not as high resolution, but it's pretty good. And this is the first time we could see people actually thinking, right? This has been around for at least a couple decades, probably 3 or 4 by now. So that's fMRI, but we're talking a couple $1 million to get this thing lined up. There's something called, but this was the original way to do magnetic resonance. Use magnets for imaging, but now there's something that's much smaller that gets the same benefits called, this is magnetoencephalography. That's a mouthful. And there's 2 types of MEG. There's this big one. It's also a pretty big machine. And similar, it's got similar results to FMRI, just slightly different measurements and stuff, but it's also pretty big. And there's a smaller version these days. This is the state of the art as of the last 5 or 7 years. And so we've got our happy camper here on the left drinking coffee. So, but it's much smaller. You can see, she could actually drink a cup of coffee and, move her head around and stuff. You see there's still a lot of wires going on. And interestingly, under the hood, this was from some advanced physics that was necessary in order to get this. So we've got, continual advances in this. And it's all these advances so far have really been driven by trying to fix people with brain issues, right? Who are unhealthy in some ways. It hasn't been trying to optimize healthy people. Another one, I mentioned this before, EEG. And there's, probably 20 EEG vendors out there. This is electroencephalography. So it's simply measuring electric signals on the scalp. You can also have EMG. So instead of the electric signals on the scalp, it can be on anywhere else in your body. So here's some, sensors on your fingers and hand. There's something else that's, you could call it BCI, you could call it not, but it's definitely on the threshold. It's subvocalization, and it's measuring silent speech. So basically you whisper, but your mouth, your lips aren't even moving. You're not making sounds, but interestingly, you can sense this with sensors right above your vocal cord, and it'll pick this up, and it's as if you're speaking into a microphone. So pretty cool tech. And there's actually a couple startups out there going for this in the last couple of years. So we'll see where this goes. And also there's eye tracking and high-res eye imaging. So, if you look at this picture on the left, right, this is a high-res image of someone's eye. And you notice there's a lot of interesting patterns in there, right? Turns out that these patterns have meaning, and people have been applying AI to look at these patterns to identify if you're sick in certain ways, to identify health and so on. So you can do this even with a static image, but then if you have a functional image, a dynamic image, then you can even do that much more, right? Because of how the eye is twitching around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can learn a lot from the eyes that way, and then of course flip it around, just tracking the eye as it moves around. So if you're using your eye to drive a mouse, for example, it feels like you're not moving things around, because when you move your eye, it doesn't feel like you're moving compared to your hand, right? So eye tracking and high-res eye imaging is a thing. And we should consider it. We should lump it in with BCI because it's probably the closest window into the brain that we have. And also there's something called FUS, functional ultrasound. And here you're emitting ultrasound and detecting echoes. This one's also interesting because you can use it to do writing to the brain. You can kind of nudge it and write to the brain rather than just read. Optogenetics can do this too. A lot of people, including myself, are more antsy about things writing to the brain, but definitely reading from the brain is pretty cool. And there can be the writing as well. And writing, maybe probably the market's going to demand it and want it. It's sort of like Neo downloading how to fly a helicopter, right? So you can maybe if this stuff gets really advanced, you can actually learn new skills literally in your sleep. There's also FNIRS. This is functional near infrared spectroscopy. Really a mouthful to say. And so you see this happy camper wearing this helmet, and what it is these infrared signals that are getting shot through the skull, because infrared can easily penetrate through bone, and then basically echoing back and seeing how things flow, and it's also tracking blood flow. So it's giving you close to the results that FMRI gave you in the past, but with $50,000 worth of hardware instead of $2 million worth of hardware. So this has become a lot more popular for a lot of clinical settings, et cetera. And I'm quite excited for it. And there's, and there's a high-res version of this too. There's maybe 3 or 4 vendors in the world doing the high-res version, another 20 doing the low-res version. So FNIRS is, to me, pretty exciting. So now let's start connecting the dots on this, right? The first part of my talk, I talked about how AI is, and market forces are driving AI from AI to AGI to ASI. And there's risk involved in that. And probably the most pragmatic way to address this, there's risk involved from a humanity perspective, right? I'd love if humanity could play a role in the future. So the most pragmatic approach is, well, can we have something for humanity that's competitive with this? And of course, if you can't beat them, join them. So leveraging silicon itself, and the main path to that is with BCI, right? So I've talked about BCI, state-of-the-art of BCI devices, and there's more and more money going into BCI, but it's not hot the way that, say, blockchain is hot or AI is hot, but it's starting to warm up. now there's consumer devices that have been coming out here too, right? Well, I mentioned it's mostly for, helping to fix broken people, basically. There's consumer devices coming out to help optimize healthy people, but it's very early. Okay, can you guys hear me? Am I still there? I'm assuming yes, I see yes. Great, I'm gonna keep going then. Sorry about that. So, yeah, my brain isn't perfect. So, all right. So let's talk about related consumer devices. So here's something. Turns out that EEG, it's actually pretty inaccurate for most things, mostly not great, but a relatively low-cost EEG sensor near your ears, for example, can measure alpha waves, beta waves, and this is enough to see if you're in flow state or not, if you're focusing or not. And so this company here has basically put that into headphones. So you've got some headphones that are pretty good headphones on their own, but then they also are measuring the EEG signals on your scalp, near your ear, and identifying if you're in a flow state or not. And if you've fallen out of flow state, it gives you a gentle tap, right, to say, hey, you're out of flow, let's get back into it. So I think that's a pretty pragmatic approach. Of course, it's not, grand science fiction, but it's a pragmatic, a thing to do. But actually, if you think of BCI can and even EEG can take us farther. What you see here is a person that's actually typing using EEG. And this is actually a pretty landmark picture because it was 2012, Tsinghua University in China, one of the top universities of China. And this was, as far as I know, the first team that got par with human speed typing. They were getting about 20 words per minute when they type with just an EEG. And of course, they had to have the right techniques. So here they're staring at a keyboard, basically, and each key on there is flashing as fast as possible with a different pseudo-random pattern. And so it's actually CDMA, the same technology that Qualcomm built its house on, and others use as well. But that was actually a big breakthrough, rather than just saying, close your eyes and imagine the letter A, which is very hard, right? So that worked very well. And it's actually good enough, if you think about Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, he most of his books, maybe all the books that he wrote, was when he was paralyzed, couldn't move at all, right, from this disease, devastating disease he had, Lou Gehrig's disease. But he still wrote books. How was it? With devices like this, right? So he thanks to BCI technology with EEGs, he was able to type out his books, and we are all the better for it as humanity. Thank you, Stephen Hawking. RIP. So we actually have decent tech, and this keeps getting better, better, better. Actually, with it has recently been coupled with LLM tech, and the error rate went down by about a factor of 2. So they're past 50 words per minute now, which is amazing for just that. Okay. You can also have subtitles on glasses. This is, not BCI directly, but you can wear glasses, and that technology is LCD technology from the 70s, right? So it's super cheap. It's almost as cheap as a piece of Scotch tape. But of course, if you want to have it, nicer and all that, you want to integrate it with a computing system and so on. And these things are out there and exist and stuff, right? We've all heard about the Google Glass stuff from 15 years ago, but now there's technology from like Brilliant Labs and fancier stuff like I'll talk about, like Apple Vision Pro. So yeah, subtitles and glasses. This can help deaf people, of course. They can, instead of just lip reading, they can see subtitles. So this company is rolling with this, but it maybe is useful elsewhere too. There's the Meta Ray-Ban smart glasses that were released just over a year ago. And what's on them? So there's a camera, like we see in the photo. There's also a microphone right above the nose. And the camera takes videos and photographs. And there's also integrated speakers, but it's not regular speakers, it's bone conduction. I have a pair of these. To be honest, they're awesome. I use them all the time. I've got kids, so I use them, when I'm playing with my kids or doing some sports or something with them. I've got the video on, and that way I can engage with them fully without having to hold the camera and whatnot. I also, just simply walk around taking phone calls. And it's got an excellent mic. I can listen on the audio through the bone conduction. It's excellent. And so I find them all in all really great. A lot of other people really like the chat interface too. You can talk to it and talk to, Meta's LLM model, Llama. So overall, they've done so well, they've actually sold 1 million units. So this is probably the first AR device that has hit consumers that has had actually success in sales. And interestingly, you know, they ditched the screen, right? That was the breakthrough. So they are not much more expensive than a regular pair of Ray-Bans, and they're very useful in day-to-day. Meta has announced they're coming up with a new version of this that has a screen for, you know, basic functionality like navigation and so on. So it's starting to be sort of like what the Google Glass was 15 years ago. But of course, you can do much more than that with today's technology for a lot more money, right? Actually, here's one that's still all cheap. You know, this is 300 euros. This one's 300 euros. Meta Quest 3, wearable AR. It was the first wearable AR/VR that fooled my brain. Everything before that I tried didn't fool my brain. This one did. And, you know, it's not just VR as well. So it places objects in your room and you can interact with them. And it's pretty good. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good. Enough to fool my brain, at least some of the time. Also released about 9 months ago was Apple Vision Pro. This thing was $3,500. It's still out there, of course. And for that, you get something that really fools your brain. You can have a wine glass, a real physical wine glass sitting in front of you, and then a fake one sitting right next to it, and your brain can't tell the difference. So that's what $3,500 will buy. This thing is, you know, pretty bulky. It can be heavy on your head. Even on this, myself, I can't wear one of these things more than 30 minutes because it's just too heavy for my head. It's got the battery on there and so on, right? Apple Vision Pro, you know, depending on the person and stuff, it's very good, but we should think of it like a beta for people to play with to build better augmented reality apps and stuff. Not quite ready for mainstream, except for very specialized tasks, like, you know, training robots in factories, which is actually happening, and other things like that. I should also mention, you know, Meta has announced that they have something like this called, well, I think it's actually more like this, shrunk into the form factor of glasses via some super expensive camera technology. This has eye tracking and cameras and all that. But because of the camera technology, it's $10,000. So they're working to try to reduce the cost, but they said they'll be shipping it late 2027 at soonest. So I think there's a lot of people out there who'd be happy to spend $10,000 right now for it, though. So we'll see. Maybe they'll ship it sooner. But I love this one too. It's very much, you know, sort of an augmentation thing. Dude turns his eye socket into a flashlight. So he lost his eye to cancer. He's like, okay, I can walk around with a glass eye, but can I do more? So what did he do? He just put a light in there, right? And he turns it on, turns it off, kind of hilarious, DIY. So I should try to get going here towards end. Actually, Yash, I should ask, do you guys have more than 15 minutes? Because if I make this, you know, instead of just a total of 1 hour, an hour and 15 minutes, then we'll have a little more space for questions. Is that okay? Thumbs up? Great. Excellent. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to combine these things now, right? The brain-computer interface technology and some of the consumer apps. So, and yeah, I mentioned this briefly, but because these aren't out yet, this is the Meta Orion prototype. And they've got the glasses. They look extra thick. That's coming down. But they've got a quality that's almost level of Apple Vision Pro. And they also have a pretty cool interface. So Apple Vision Pro, to control things, etc., they have, you control with gestures. Here, instead of gestures, they've got this wrist on your hand, on your arm, sorry, this wristband on your wrist, and it's detecting myoelectric signals. So the electrical signals on the surface of your skin at your wrist. And basically you're twitching your wrist in various ways. You know, you can do keyboard level motions and all that. And with that, you can type, right? You have this on one hand and both hands, you can type. And it takes way less energy then. So reviewers of this and the Apple Vision Pro said, you know, they thought Apple Vision Pro's interface was the way to go. Then they tried this and they're like, oh, wow, this is so much better because you can accomplish a lot more real work quickly because you don't have to spend so much physical energy to type, right? You're used to typing quickly with a keyboard without having to spend lots of physical energy just do one thing, and Apple Vision Pro didn't give you that. This does with this wristband. So to me, this is a pretty cool breakthrough. It might seem very small and mundane, but they did an awesome job on tuning it to be great, right? And this is because Meta, you know, around the time they renamed themselves from Facebook to Meta, they actually went hot and heavy into investing in metaverse, including BCI devices for this, right? So they bought a company called Control Labs for $500 million, one of the biggest acquisitions ever. And that's the company that had these wristbands. And they spent the next few years refining. And of course, they've done other quiet purchases of BCI companies too. So Meta is really going deep into this, but it's not just Meta, right? We are seeing Apple doing movement on all of it, and more recently Google and Samsung as well. So assume that, and Meta themselves is saying this is going to eat the smartphone. So there's tons of money in this, right? So all the smartphone makers, of course, have to go for it because it likely will eat the smartphone over time. Okay, keeping going. So what are some killer apps, right? So here, this can eat the phone with easy to use AR. But then what about messaging, right? Well, what if you can message simply by thinking about it, right? So SMing, silent messaging, this is a term from a famous novel, 2006, called Rainbow's End. I consider it the archetypical novel for AR. And how do you send? Well, there's a few ways. There's the myoelectric way, twitch typing, right? Like I showed in the previous slide, or eye tracking, or sublocalization, or otherwise, right? So there's quite a few ways to type, and the receive is simply subtitles from the glasses. That's easy tech, right? You could use LEDs from the 70s if you want. Sorry, LCDs from the 70s. But you're going to have the integrated compute system, et cetera, and it'll be $300, $500, whatever. So SMing, it's going to be a major use case, of course, and it'll be standard, right? Internal dialogue, right? People are already doing this with the Meta Ray-Ban smart glasses, right? They're asking questions, getting answers, but right now they're just saying it out loud, right? And that really does act like your personal Jiminy Cricket to Pinocchio. You can do Q&A, you can do search, you can say, get it to act as a conscience for you, whatever you want, right? But soon you'll be able to do it completely quietly, right? Just, sending SMs, if you will, to this agent asking questions. You can do, high fidelity emotion detection, right? It can say, hey, I can tell you're getting angry from the signals in your brain, et cetera. Maybe time to calm down, count to 10, whatever, right? That can be very helpful to defuse situations and so on. And it can be emotion detection of other people too, right? Saying, hey, this person is getting super, super angry. Do you want them to be angry? Because if you want them to be angry, keep doing what you're doing. So anyway, that's going to be super useful. Here's another one, big one, perfect memory. So right now, I actually have augmented memory beyond my own brain. I have, call it an exocortex that helps to record my memories. That's been going on for almost 20 years. And it's my wife, right? So she's actually, her and I spend a lot of time together, and she remembers a lot of things that I simply forget, right? I don't want to forget, but I do. So she's a bit like an exocortex for me. But imagine if you can also have that where it feels like it's directly part of your brain, right? Where you can talk back and forth to it. So you're walking around with these glasses, it's recording everything, getting stored locally or remotely or both, right? Locally plus a remote backup. And then you can say, hey, what did I have for breakfast this morning? You can just type that in, right? And it'll retrieve that for you and show you a picture, whatever, right? So that's gonna, or what was I doing a year ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just like we can query to YouTube to find videos of certain times, we could query this to find videos and photographs of our own memories, right? That were recorded. So it's not looking in the brain per se, it's looking in the memories that of things that we experienced that were recorded all the time. So this is coming probably much sooner because this is a killer app, I think, right? And by the way, this overall, I'm going through a bunch of possible killer apps because we need killer apps in order for mainstream to accept this, right? To take off. What's another potential killer app? Sharing visual memories. So once you've retrieved the memory, then why not simply send it to someone else, right? And it can display in their augmented reality glasses, or if they don't have the glasses yet, they see it in their phone or whatever. But at some point, the vast majority of us will have these augmented reality glasses, not goggles, and it's just going to be part of us, right? Talking back and forth with images, with memories, and so on. Super fast content creation, right? So if I'm, a designer of electrical chips, of movies, of video games, of many, many things that are visual. Well, right now, 5 years ago, the fastest way to do this was you're on a computer, you're drawing out things with a CAD software, whatever. Then along came LLMs, and we had text prompts to help us. And these are getting better, and they're combining with the traditional video editing tools and so on. Good. Well, but of course, even with that, right? If you want to have something rough that you don't really care, maybe for a blog post, you can type in a prompt and get something decent, maybe in the first or second try, right? But if you want to have something really good, you're going to have to go in and edit it a bunch, and it's probably going to take you a couple or 3 hours still, right? But what if you just think of this thing as a 2D image that shows up in the back of your head. So in your head, there's various regions of your brain, and the very back of your head is your visual cortex, okay? And your visual cortex, think of it like a low-res two-dimensional TV. Think like a TV from the early 50s. And it's there in the back of your brain, back of your skull, and it can be picked up with FNIRs, for example, and other things like FMRI and stuff. But FNIRs, that's right now, today, $50,000 worth of hardware on something that doesn't have mainstream manufacturing yet, right? Large-scale manufacturing. So it can be optimized. So imagine you think of an image, this FNIRs picks it up, it sees it, low res, but then it runs it through the LM and creates a high-res version of it, right? And then puts it on screen. And then you're like, okay, that's cool, but not quite there. So you imagine a slightly different image in your head to steer it, and that shows up 2 seconds, 5 seconds later on the screen, right? So now we have super fast content creation for images, for videos, and more. And that's a large industry, and overall, right? Because we're talking Hollywood with TV and film, video games, and more. So I'm quite excited about this application. And once we can create contents very fast too, going back to this, basically too, sharing visual memories, one step beyond is talking to each other in pictures, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So we might find ourselves having more and more conversations literally in pictures, right? We can have prosthetics. This is more for people who, have a missing limb or something, but they could be actually really, really well powered now with low latency response because much better BCI. And yeah, I was touching on this before, the conversation in pictures. So this actually in Star Trek, this is called a mind meld, right? So you think of the image, FNIRS detects it, LLM inputs it, and then the LLM outputs a hi-fi image, right? And then you send that to your friend's phone, and you're thinking back and forth doing pictures. And yeah, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So this would be higher bandwidth than even face-to-face right now. And once we get really good at that, then imagine we don't even bother sending it through the LLM. Imagine that the other person is really used to speaking with you back and forth. Say my wife, whatever, is really used to speaking to me. So she sees my FNIRS signal directly, that 2D grid of my visual cortex, the back of my brain. And I see hers, and we just speak back and forth that way, back and forth, and talking. So it's basically a new language, right? So instead of speaking an output from our vocal cords, input to the ear, it's actually output from our visual cortex, and then back input to the visual cortex, right? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So this is possible with technology up to date, which is kind of amazing to believe. Of course, these days it's low resolution, and it's not really being experimented on very much, but it could be, right? So, so stuff that was only the fare of Star Trek just 20 years ago is now possible with today's technology. What can we do with this? How is it going to evolve? Well, a macro level way to think about this is the following. I talked about how we need to get competitive by having a competitive substrate to the ASIs, right? So we've got a regular bio brain on the left here, called that the Biostack. And then you've got a coprocessor, a co-brain on the right. That's the silicon stack, right? So it's, the biological you on the left and the silicon you on the right, but it's all part of you, right? And so at first you've got the silicon coprocessor. It's talking to you back and forth, like you're iterating with it, with the BCI, right? With the FNIRS to sense the visual cortex or otherwise, right? But of course you've got the wristband, et cetera. Okay. And the thing is, there's something about our brains that makes this easier than you think. We are all natural born cyborgs. Think about it. When you ride a bike, it becomes part of you, right? It feels like an extension of yourself. You've got this high bandwidth interface back and forth between you and the bike. You're gripping the handlebars, and then you can feel the ground through the bike, right? Same thing with the keyboard, right? It becomes part of you. Those keys are sort of fused to your fingers, and that broader machine is part of you. And so. And by the way, this quote, "We are natural born cyborgs," a famous neuroscientist framed it like this way in a famous book on how plastic our brains are. Similar with BCI. How I see it, when you use a BCI, it becomes part of you, right? It's going to feel as natural as riding a bicycle or more, right? And you won't even be seeing it, right? It'll be, because next to you as a coprocessor, but it'll just feel like a part of you very, very quickly. And then, of course, as this thing starts to eat the cell phone industry, people getting benefits from sending photos and creating images faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's going to be more and more demand for this, right? And higher bandwidth. So the performance is going to grow with each device generation. This picture here is showing the evolution of the smartphone, right? And the cell phone, to be precise, from the cell phones of the late 80s that would take up a suitcase to the smartphones of today, right? That have way more functionality than just phone, have eaten, probably a couple dozen different devices from flashlights to GPS receivers. And they keep going, right? So that phone will get eaten or will evolve, will morph into a different shape that is glasses on our faces. And eventually, by the way, contact lenses. Okay, so the performance is going to keep growing because of money. So what's going to happen? Well, at first, this is how it's going to look. We're going to have our bio brain on the left and our coprocessor on the right. And the coprocessor brain is going to be much less powerful than our Biostack brain power, right? But then as the bandwidth goes up, we're going to feel okay about having more power on the silicon side of the brain. And by the way, you don't want to have huge silicon power on the right with small bandwidth, because it could have its own emergent intelligence that you couldn't control, right? But if you have it where it's small and not as powerful to start with, and then you're basically tuning it all the time to like you, to think like you, to behave like you, it will have its own emergent patterns. But guess what? It's going to be part of you. So the left side and the right side are you, not just the left side, it's both. And what's interesting is the bandwidth doesn't even need to be that high. So right now in our bio brains, we've actually got two halves, right? The left hemisphere, the right hemisphere. And a surprising little tidbit fact is, if you ask what's the bandwidth between the left half and the right half, connected by the corpus callosum, it's about 50 kilobits per second, like old school modems. That's low, right? And we can readily get 50 kilobits per second with even non-invasive technology like FMRIs, I'm pretty sure. I don't think it's been shown yet, but we can get there with market pressure and optimizing. So that's pretty cool, right? So we can actually get, decent enough bandwidth for, call it a third hemisphere that happens to be of silicon, talking back and forth to it. And just half of our brain and the right half of our brain, they have a lot of their own independent thoughts, but they sync and they reconcile. It'll be a similar thing with this third hemisphere. It'll have its own thoughts, emergent intelligence, and so on, but it'll reconcile with the other two hemispheres. And over time, it'll be always aligned then too, right? Okay, so then the silicon stack power is going to keep going up and up until they're par, right? But it's going to be aligned, and it'll be us. And there's benefits of this, right? The silicon stack co-brain, it offers a lot more storage, a lot more compute compared to our Biostack. But they're held back at least partly by the low bandwidth. But what if we, what about more and more bandwidth, right? And so what if you needed to go to invasive, right? Well, we could go invasive with the chips, but do you want to get your skull cracked open every 6 months? Elon hilariously has been trying to shift the Overton window by joking about having skulls made of titanium. So then, maybe you crack open your skull, but it's not going to be painful because it's not, slicing bone. It's just, flipping a switch. So, but maybe that'll come. Optogenetics though, right? That's only semi-invasive. It's a needle that you have just once, boom. That's going to be interesting. And you could get, by the way, with this, you can get way more bandwidth than a chip. So this one could be an end run around chips. And so I see that demand, the market demand is going to, and more, is going to push to go past the pure non-invasive, right? And there's two reasons. There's the market forces, number two on the right. Like I talked about, consumers are going to want more performance versus status quo. And there's going to be some people who do have invasive BCI because of health issues. They're going to have way more performance, and they're going to be able to think better than any others, right? Just sort of like we're seeing people with leg replacements that are par with regular humans, right? So totally optimized, that can run really well. And we'll see this with brains too, right? So that's one thing, is market forces. And then the second is going to be to fix AI risk, right? So other Western governments will allow it because of the risk issue, AI risk, or maybe hungry smaller nations will do it first, right? To get a leg ahead, right? Maybe in Argentina or in El Salvador of the world. We'll see, right? Okay, so demand is going to push this to go past non-invasive. And the Overton window is going to be shifting all the way along because of the market forces. So basically, the market forces are going to drive us to higher bandwidth, higher storage, higher compute, and we're all going to be happy about it. So we're going to start off at this level. It would be, par with silicon stack power equaling Biostack power, but we solve it with invasive or semi-invasive, and I think semi-invasive. Get the jab, a good jab for the optogenetics, and then the silicon stack is going to be 2x more powerful, then 4x, then 8x, then 16x, then 100x, and more, then 1000x, right? But every step along the way, it's still going to be you. We are natural born cyborgs. This is you. It's a part of you, right? So we're going to have this silicon stack side way more powerful than the biostack side, but it's all still in you. We are natural born cyborgs. Or you can think of it also as hyper-localized AI alignment, aligning it with ourselves. It's a square watermelon taken to the nth degree, hyper-local. Guess what? You have achieved human superintelligence. You get a medal. You're now competitive with artificial superintelligence, right? Because you've got the silicon, but it's still a part of you, because it's a bit like ship of Theseus, the ship where the plank gets replaced, etc. A better analogy is where you start off with a shack that you're living in, tiny little shack, but then you do repairs, renovations, and now it's a better shack, and you grow it a bit to a regular size house. You grow it a bit more, add a wing, add another wing, add another wing. Now you got a mansion. Now you start going up, add another floor, add another floor. You've got 4 stories, 5 stories. You've got a moderate size apartment building. Then you keep going up, 5 stories to 10 stories, 20, 40, 80, 160. Now you've got a skyscraper, right? But when did it shift from, did the building actually, change its character? Well, if it did, it was bit by bit, right? There was no perceptible macro change all at once. It was all just one step at a time, right? It evolved from a shack to a mansion, to an apartment building, to a skyscraper. And I would love, personally, to have a skyscraper from my mind. So now here's the funny thing, right? Imagine, I'm 90 years old. I'm on my deathbed. My biostack body is giving out. And at the same time, I can have all these possible adventures of going out there, exploring the cosmos, reshaping the cosmos, and so on, right? And frankly, I see that, my biostack body is holding me back right now. I'm on my deathbed, but it's definitely holding me back from exploring and reshaping the cosmos, because it's kind of hard to fly around like a monkey in a tin can compared to simply being a pattern of intelligence. So what do? I take that cord from my silicon side to my biostack side, and I cut it like a fingernail. I clip it like a fingernail. And then I'm fully on the silicon stack side, and it's me. And I'm ready and raring to explore and reshape the cosmos. So that's the end of the talk. I'm just going to have a couple of slides to conclude. I talked about how AI, superintelligence, is coming, market forces, etc. What can we do about it for humanity to play a role in the future? Well, bring BCI, brain-computer interfaces, to the masses with killer apps like silent messaging and perfect memory. Then market forces and AI risk will drive us to a competitive substrate. And it will take us to human superintelligence to explore the cosmos and beyond. Thank you. That's it. So we can take questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Trent. I'll just ask the room who has questions. Okay, there's one. Can you come here and ask your question?
Okay. Not that easy. Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I have 2 questions, actually. So first, speaking from the perspective of minimizing AI risks, if you could decide for 100 geniuses, like for 100 the most smart people in the world, what they should work on, do you think that any of them should work on AI alignment, or would you just recommend all of them to work on BCI to minimize the risks?
So there's already probably more than 100 people working on AI alignment, right? But you don't need, like, sometimes people say we need an AI to tell us how to solve the problem of AI alignment, but that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, we can already envision what superintelligence is like, etc. And think of it like the following. Imagine if the ants came to us, right? Those swarms of insects, and they came to us and said, hey, we see that you humans are much smarter than us, but we would like you to be aligned with us. Can you dumb yourself down to ant values, please? And we'd be like, no, go away, right? So an AI superintelligence, an artificial superintelligence is going to be way more intelligent than us, right? It'll be like a god to us. And it'll look down on us. And if we're saying, hey, can you align yourself with ant values? It would actually be detuning itself in the same way we would detune ourselves from down to ant values, right? It would lose a sense of itself. So I actually think that, you could have 10,000 super geniuses to try to solve the problem of AI alignment. And the only realistic solution to the problem of AI alignment is competitive substrate, right? Upload or BCI. And upload is too far away for this race that we're in. And BCI is maybe we have a chance still, right? But it's, we're losing the race, to be honest. So if I had, to your question, if I had my choice of where to put, 100 super smart people or 1,000 super smart people who want to work on AI risk, I'd put all of them onto BCI because it's the only pragmatic solution.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question, unrelated. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I have a feeling that working memory is much more the key of reasoning and high IQ than retrieval and long-term memory, etc. And I'm not quite sure how BCI and solutions that you told us today about can help us to develop this working memory things and it's better reasoning that is required for, I don't know, developing a complicated strategy or comparing 10 different strategies. I think that it will require us to talk to AIs, and then it's again the risk that it's deceitful, etc.
So I fully agree with you. We can't optimize our bio brains very much, right? Maybe with synthetic biology we can optimize them 2x or something, right? But we're not going to be able to extend the power of our meat bag brains to be par with silicon brains, right? But if we configure these processors as co-processors that are really truly of us, connected to us, even more so than we're connected to our keyboards or our bicycles, via these high bandwidth connections, they are part of us, right? And that has the scale to be competitive with the AIs and AGIs out there, right? Because it's actual silicon. These things have reasoning capabilities, right? They're getting really good at it, right? That's one of the latest, greatest fads in AI research is chain of thought reasoning, and this is working really well, right? DeepSeek guys got it emergent, for example, right? Where it had adaptive chain of thought, adaptive length of reasoning, depending on the problem at hand. So, and it will be, it has no, as Moore's law extends, then there's no conceivable limit on how much you could reason. It could easily out-reason humans over time, and it's already doing so in many domains, right? So the simple answer is, if we want to become, if we ourselves as humans to be competitive with artificial superintelligences, then we will be able to reason at the speed and capability that they will, because we will have silicon coprocessors as a part of us that are par in power to the silicon power of the ASIs. The main thing to understand is that the silicon coprocessors are a part of us. It's not some separate thing that you talk to and stuff that you turn off. It's part of you. That's the key.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are other questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. But if we have still this biological substrate, are we not kind of we can become 10x smarter by adding all these additional silicon layers, but we're still limited by a biological one. So we're still going to be, the ASI will still be 10,000x the speed. We're still on a different level. Isn't that fundamentally?
So no, remember, so we, as I was just saying, Trent McConaghy, would have a silicon coprocessor that is that is me. There's the bio brain side and the silicon brain side, right? Those are all me. And the silicon brain side will be 10,000 times more powerful than the bio brain. So that 10,000 times more powerful side, the silicon side, will be competitive. And yes, to your question, if it's too deferential to the bio side, then the bio side will have to, it will have to start basically claiming more powerful itself as me. And I'll say, you know what, I'm going to listen less and less to what my Biostack side is suggesting because it's less useful, right? And eventually, like I talked about at the tail end of my talk, I could cut the cord, right? On my deathbed, that's a pretty rational decision then. And some people might decide to cut the cord a lot sooner, right? If the Biostack side is really holding us back, and in terms of competitiveness, maybe people will cut that cord to the bio side, when they're 30 years old, or within a couple of years of having that first coprocessor at all, right? So we'll see. So I'm not concerned about the bio side holding us back, because the silicon side is a part of us too, and that eventually, at some point, for each of us, if we choose, will be 100% us. This is how we, end game is that there's going to be a bunch of patterns of intelligence living on the cloud, right? Living out there. And the default right now for humanity is that there's all those patterns of intelligence are going to be fully derived from the AIs and AGIs of today, right? But if we have a say in the matter with BCIs and stuff, then some of those patterns of intelligence will have their roots as human intelligences, right? And maybe that's narcissistic, but I personally want to explore and reshape the cosmos, right? So maybe it's only the generation of humans that's alive that actually cares. But so if all of us die out, then still humanity would have bequeathed this next thing. But the generation of humanity counts for a lot, right? The current generation of humanity, and I want to explore and reshape the stars. So that's kind of how I see it. So overall, it's really, really important to understand that at some point, any of you who are game would probably end up being a fully 100% digital intelligence. But what I'm showing you is a path that we can get there, leveraging the technologies of today and market forces driving this to get closer and closer and closer, right? And the fact with some realizations about how plastic our brains are and how we're natural born cyborgs, right? This is, I kind of connected the dots on a few things that are, known in certain circles towards something very pragmatic that maybe we have a fighting chance to be part of the future. Okay, I'll stop there. You're on mute. Or, there we go.
My question is more around a thought, and I want to know your thoughts on this. It makes me feel like the interaction between humans or different entities in such a system would be something like high frequency trading is with the stock market, where the more speed and more capacity you have, the faster processing you have, the more market advantage you have. And the other thing is, it also inflates, I can also sense that it will increase the amount of information being processed. It will also increase the level of noise in the system. Right? Our brains are natural filters for a lot of noise that is not relevant for our survival. But it might also increase the level of noise. So just want to get your thoughts on that. I don't have a specific question.
So overall, right, how will, definitely all these factors will go up. So I think the HFT analogy is apt. On the noise thing, I mean, is HFT useless because there's so much noise? No, people found, there's some people doing a lot of HFT. Maybe they try it out, they aren't able to make money, so they quit, right? But other people figure it out and they make money and they keep doing it, right? So market forces will teach the different companies and projects going for this sort of thing that I described, BCI Act. Some will be successful with the right way to take things to market and some won't, right? I think that's the way to think about it. And yeah, I think that's the way to think about it. Actually, there's one other analogy here, I think, which is helpful, and it's the following. So in computer science, if you have a bunch of nodes, right? Let's say you've got 100 or 1,000 nodes, and they're connected. So every node is connected to several other nodes, right? Maybe you'll have a cluster of nodes highly connected to each other, and maybe some of those nodes in there have a few loose connections to other clusters, right? So you actually have emergent hierarchy, right? Where, as a rule of thumb, you have an object, an entity, a blob, a cluster, whatever, if it has 10x more bandwidth talking within that cluster compared to talking outside, right? And that's sort of the concept of an individual, right? Or a group or whatever, right? Where you have higher bandwidth within compared to outside, a 10x different, right? And that's a pretty good rule of thumb overall. And so if you think about it as yourself as an individual or myself as an individual, I have way higher bandwidth talking to myself than I do with anyone else, right? So it's a very well-defined interface of where Trent ends and the rest of the world is, because I have that high bandwidth interface. But when I sit down at the keyboard, I'm interfacing with this keyboard at a high bandwidth, and that's why it becomes part of me. is because there's this, a lot of bits flowing back and forth between me and that keyboard, mechanically, or the bicycle, similar thing, right? So to basically get a bit into the sort of slightly, physiology of the brain and all this reconciling with computer science sort of network theory, basically the individual of Trent is wherever the bandwidth limit ends, right? So if I have a high bandwidth interface from my existing brain to a silicon coprocessor, that will feel like part of me simply because of the high bandwidth, right? So it'll be much higher bandwidth back and forth for the rest of my brain compared to the rest of the world, you see? So that's I just wanted to share that analogy overall as why I see this happening and our brains adapting.
Thanks for sharing that analogy. I have a slide follow-up, very small. This, given this, it feels like the 10x more bandwidth part is more likely to happen from silicon to silicon than silicon to bio. So it might be like the bio part is actually an extension. So like the bio part becomes an extension of the silicon rather than the silicon becoming an extension of the bio.
Yeah, so I think that's certainly a risk, and this is why it's really important for the silicon side to start with being relatively low power, right? Like low intelligence, so that basically the bio side can swamp it and really have a strong effect on that silicon side, such that it's your values, your ways of thinking, your mental models, etc., as much as possible, right? Like RLHF in an ultra local fashion, right? But in a way where it's that silicon, it's very high bandwidth. That's why it feels like part of you. But then over time, as the power increases on the silicon side, then it's definitely going to have a lot of bandwidth back and forth amongst itself, for sure, right? Emergent pools of intelligence in the John Holland sense, etc., right? So, and this is a thing in AI, right? You have emergent intelligence. I've done stuff like that myself with AI, and we should expect that, right? And as it gets par with our meat-bag brains, then it will, it will already have a bit of its own. That's why it's useful to think of it like a third hemisphere, right? Just like my left and right hemispheres have their own sort of intelligence on their own, and they disagree in many ways. Well, in a lot of ways, but they find a way to agree with sort of a blockchain-style consensus on top, right? And that's what happens with this third thing. But then with the third hemisphere, if you will, but then as the third hemisphere gets 10x, 100x more power, it's going to be still tuned with you, but the bio side is going to be less and less and less relevant, right? But that's okay, because the silicon side is you, right? The emergent patterns, et cetera, are you. And so that's why, you go from this shack to the skyscraper. The skyscraper eventually might get rid of the shack too, right? And the skyscraper is fully silicon. The shack was the bio side. Eventually, the bio side, the tiny little wooden shack doesn't matter anymore. But it takes time to get there.
Hey Trent, just want to check. I think there are 2 more questions. Do you have like 5 more minutes? Okay, great.
Yeah. So I wanted to understand, when you're talking about the silicon side, does it need to be some kind of a physical augmented matter alongside our brain, or is it like something that the biological organisms could be moving freely, and the silicon side could be centralized in some place or decentralized in some other place anyway. I want to understand, in terms of physical manifestation, how are you looking into this integration? How are you envisioning this integration?
I think that's a great question. So overall, you do want to make sure that the silicon side is sovereign, such that it can't be captured by powers. Like, let's say, if you're running an AWS, you don't want Jeff Bezos to pull the plug and then you lose your third brain, right? Especially if that's the majority of yourself. So you definitely need, and also another thing, if you have this high bandwidth interface, this high bandwidth sensors of what's going on in your brain, and reading and maybe writing, you don't want all of that to flow to Meta and then to flow on to the NSA and stuff, right? Like we've had until very recently. Good job, Zuck, finally getting rid of that. Or maybe he still has it, we don't know. But that's very dangerous, right? And that's the question of cognitive liberty. It's one thing for him to see your text messages on Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. It's another thing for him to see your raw brain signals, and the NSA and the 7 Eyes. It's not just USA, it's Germany and Canada and the rest that are getting that information from USA too, right? You definitely don't want any of that. So in order to retain cognitive liberty and general physical sovereignty, you need a couple things. You need to make sure that the physical hardware is not centralized in some way. It can be local with backups, centralized or decentralized, and that sensing array itself, the flow of data, we will need to invent some new protocols for access management of the data as it flows from the sensors to the rest, right? And actually, this is my specialty. I've worked on this with Ocean Protocol for the last 7 years, decentralized access control. So I know a lot about it. And also, relating to the decentralized compute, the decentralized storage, et cetera, with the Arweaves and Filecoins and others in the world there. And things like trusted execution environments and other privacy preserving tech is going to help a lot too. In terms of the final physical manifestation then, these are the main constraints such that we retain cognitive liberty of the signals and sovereignty overall. After that, most of the processing and stuff could live decentralized in the cloud if you want. If it meets also some latency needs, right? So there's probably always going to be some local stuff. So you're okay. And honestly, you don't want to get cut off from the internet, right? So you'd probably have Starlink receivers and maybe some decentralized thing too. But what if that still gets cut off? So, but these days, local storage, Moore's law for storage has gone faster than Moore's law for compute, right? So storage, local storage, you can do a ridiculous amount with local storage, right? So, and the local compute, it doesn't have to be that heavy and intense for most inference and stuff, right? And, you can do a lot with that. So I see that probably the thing that will feel the safest and the most acceptable to people will be the following: cognitive liberty and sovereignty via a decentralized protocol for access control, via backups, at least on the cloud, of decentralized cloud of everything, and ability to have decentralized compute, et cetera, that's fully sovereign, privacy preserving, et cetera. But the vast majority of stuff happening locally all the time, right? Whatever you can do locally, you will, because I think that's just, people will feel better with that at first. Over time, as we get more and more digital, as it goes from 50% digital to 95% digital to 99, and especially 100%. Then of course it's 100% digital. The physical local body matters less, right? And then not at all. And then it'll be across the cloud everywhere, right? In the ethos, in the ether, if you will, right? So that's how I see it. So the fundamental constraint is cognitive liberty and sovereignty. But then in the near term, you want to be local with many things, and then you have to also worry about latency and bandwidth and stuff.
So let's say towards the implementation of this, if I try to understand, so there will definitely be animal models which will be we should be going through animal models towards human trials. So what do you think? What kind of focus should we target? And another thing which I want to understand is, so when we are going over the silicon side, is it personal? Like when we are doing this kind of experimentation on animal models, does the silicon side, as per your understanding or your idea, do we need to have personalized silicon sites for each biological entity, or is it something like a cluster of aggregated for across, let's say, different animals, like for example, a fish, a bird, together having one single silicon site which both of them can access, something like that?
Overall, if I missed anything, let me know. On your first question, animals and stuff first. I did not talk about animals first at all, because I see that this is something right now, the technology is there with things like FNIRs for this to come to market to people right now, right? You don't need to do animal testing on FNIRs. It's infrared signals. It doesn't harm your brain or anything, right? So that is something you can bring to people now. And of course, the cost has to get chopped down, just like Meta is chopping down the cost of their $10,000 glasses to whatever, $2,000, whatever. Same thing, this $50,000 headpiece needs to go down to $10,000, $5,000, whatever. Then maybe you get it like a lease, like a cell phone, right? Excuse me. So, and of course, for the other stuff, right, like on the animal questions, the invasive technology, there was always tests on animals first, right? But now we're into more and more human trials, and that's where the future is, right? For the chips, For the optogenetics, human trials started about 3 years ago, but they had 20 years on animals, right? Mostly mice, right? With uploads, by the way, too, most of the work on uploads is called whole brain emulation. That's the name of the field, WBE, whole brain emulation. That's still on mice right now, right? People are, dreaming of doing stuff on humans, but it's really on mice still, and it's going to be for the next few years. That's why it's not fast enough, too, partly, right? So overall, we have to, once we hit humans and we get it to consumers, this is where the giant industry called the smartphone market will take over and accelerate it, right? And make it go much, much faster and have its own exponential, and that's going to be really, really important. On your second question, around, trying to remember again, darn it. Do you have the mic? What was your second? Let's see here. What was the second question again? I just jogged my memory. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was trying to understand your idea of, let's say, if we are focusing on animal models first, for individual personalized biological entities to be
localized, right?
Personalized silicon substrate or
right. Right. So once again, it's not focusing on animal models first, right? No animal models. This is straight to human. Okay, because that's just how it is. You can't train on a monkey as he's typing to get queries from an LM, right? You can, but that's just sort of a side weird interesting thing. But so animals are not part of this overall vision, except for early days of testing BCI tech, right? So overall, the question is how I see it. How localized will each of these models be, right? And I see that they will be ultra localized, right? Hyper localized. And actually these days, if you think about like how DeepSeek was trained, that costed $6 million worth of compute. About 3 days after that, we saw a team out of Berkeley, led by a PhD student, where they got similar results with about, I think, $320 worth of compute. And overall, you can think of it like the following. It's doing active learning, where each query is querying into OpenAI. Right? And then basically it can find the next sample, the next query, and then the answer of that to construct its next model, right? So for very small number of queries, it builds up its model. It has this perfect data set, right? Because it's basically choosing the query to fill in the biggest gaps, right? And so that's why you can do, in the case of Berkeley, $320 worth of compute. And they basically got an LLM, GPT4 level model for $300, right? And it was riding on the coattails of GPT4 or 4.0, no question about it. But imagine you have something like this on the coprocessor where it's trained in a similar style, but for $300. So of course it can be hyper localized to you, right? And then everything after that too. So it makes sense that this model is always tuned towards you, how you think, your values, etc. And I think that's really great, right? Right now, people are trying to have these LLMs that are trained to some idea of human values, right? But human values differ a lot from human to human. There's a few things we generally agree on, right? Don't kill, don't steal. But beyond that, there's wildly different ideas, right? So, and it's really, really hard to have an unbiased AI, right? It's going to be biased one way or the other. So imagine everyone has an AI that's totally biased to them, right? And this is possible if it's tuned to you, etc. And that's actually how I see it. So it's going to be ultra local, right? And tune end to end to you. This is why I'm talking about hyper local, hyper optimized, RLHF call it, for each of us. And the cost is no longer crazy, right? Before, how I was envisioning it was you start with a GPT4 model that costed $100 million to train, and then you tune it on top, like we're seeing with RAG and RLHF and all this for you. But we no longer have to do that thanks to the DeepSeek breakthrough and the stuff since, right? Now for $300, we can do active learning to learn our own, which is really great.
Hi, Trent. I hope you have a couple more minutes for questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to email them. So my question. Okay. So my question pertains to the physiological sustainability of operating silicon stack. Like, how are we powering this? And so first part is, how are we powering the silicon stack?
Yeah. So overall, I think the reference is smartphones, right? Like every day, we plug in our smartphone when we're sleeping, whatever, right? So when we're sleeping, we lay down and we either attach a wire to the side, or it'll be some over the air way to power, but probably the wire because it's more efficient and stuff. That's probably what we'll do, right? And then it'll have enough charge for a day, whatever it is, right? And the batteries, like the form factor, you don't want this thing to be mostly on your head, right? You want the sensors to be on your head. And maybe eventually everything will be small enough to be on your head, but it'll probably be something in your pocket and stuff. This is actually what Meta showed us, right? With their Orion glasses. There's 3 components of the Orion setup. There's the glasses themselves, which have the the eye tracking and the display and all the sensors, but it has no battery critically. And then the second thing is the wristband, and third thing is a small box that is the size of a larger cell phone that fits in your pocket, right? And that's the thing doing all the compute, right? And how I'm sure that what will happen by the time they ship it is it will be the glasses, the wristband, and all the compute, etc., will be simply a phone. And maybe it'll be any off-the-shelf phone, or maybe it'll be a special phone that Meta ships, right? So I see it similarly here, where you're going to have the sensors. Think of it just like a headband that you wear that has some sensors in the back of your head for the visual cortex. And you'll have the wristband, of course, Meta style. You'll have the glasses, Meta style, and you'll have your phone, and the battery and stuff will be there, right? But of course, every night, all those things need charging, right? Or maybe every 2 or 3 days. Like my Apple Watch needs charging every 3 days, for example, right? So we'll see. But it'll feel like another piece of consumer device tech when at night, you just charge it. That's fine, right?
The other part of it was that even with using BCIs, like whether they're invasive or non-invasive, I anticipate that you will get this massive spike in reactive oxygen species because there's so much demand for glucose from the brain. And so that starts to create additional physiological stress in the neurons. So how are we combating that? So that it's sustainable, so that's physiologically sustainable to operate BCIs of any kind.
Okay, so I can see that. So I can certainly see that maybe as an issue for an implant where your brain is spending energy to talk to the implant. But could you elaborate? Is this an issue for your brain trying to talk to an FNIRS that's simply doing reading? Is there a spike in the sugar that or energy that your brain needs in order for the reading of an FNIRS device?
So I've been trying to get an answer from a couple of people who work on BCIs, and they say that typically for any sort of glucose uptake, you need to track it with PET, but it's also, you can't operate a BCI in a PET machine. So if you're trying to do a PET scan, so you can't operate the BCI while you're getting the PET scan done. So I'm wondering if you know of any data where that sort of tracks how much of an increase in glucose consumption is happening in the brain while BCIs are being operated.
Yeah, so overall, right, let's say that we do have an answer to that, for starters, then the average consumer doesn't need to go get PET scans and stuff, right? It would just be, we would know, right? Now with FNIRS, this is not something I've ever heard of as an issue for FNIRS, and I've been digging in with it. Actually, myself and my team are experimenting with FNIRS as we speak. So what I talked about as crazy sci-fi, I've actually got a team in Ocean Protocol working on this. So we're putting our money and our actions where our mouth is. If it does turn as an issue, and then there's probably softer ways rather than measuring the spike in real time. You measure it afterwards, right? For example, maybe you're using the device intensively for half an hour, and then you jump into a PET device, the PET scan, and see if the glucose measures are still higher up in that first minute or 3 minutes, right? If it is an issue, then I would see that people might take special supplements to help their brains handle it better, right? Glucose supplements, et cetera, right? Personally, I haven't seen it as a risk. But it's an interesting question to raise. It's something I haven't heard before as a question. So thank you for that. It's a new question. And yes, like I said, I think if there was an issue, we'd have a solution. But it would be an interesting thing to research to understand. I think though also the market will tell us too, right? Like if people are using these devices and they feel super exhausted in their brain after a while from using it, then we would learn that way too, right? But people also feel exhausted simply from playing video games intensively for 3 hours, right? They sit down, they take a break, they take maybe they drink a Gatorade, whatever, depending on what you need to refresh, right? So I think even if there is an issue, there's going to be the market demand once again will step in to address this. And this is a key thing, right? It's really, really important that we get this the market pulling this along, because then we've got this multi-trillion-dollar industry pulling this along, such that humans can actually have a chance. Because otherwise, we're not getting the gains in the exponential. The traditional medical field moves much more slowly than Moore's law in silicon, right? It's really, really important to jump on that silicon train. I'm gonna have to wrap up here because I have to pick my kids up. So yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Trent, for joining. Really appreciate it. I know you're super busy, but yeah, I would just like to say thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.